longer about safety. Parents are saying they don't want to send their children to school. Too many attacks, too many warnings ignored. At 4:30 p.m. in Axbridge, a scream cut through the street. 3 people stabbed. 1 fighting for life. Police subdued a 22-year-old Afghan national with a taser. Authorities confirmed he was granted asylum in 22. Within an hour, the footage spread nationwide. Blood on the pavement, panic in broad daylight. By nightfall, protests had already ignited outside migrant hotels across 5 cities, from Kent to Southampton. These hotels are funded by British taxpayers at £8.2 million a day, housing over 50,000 people. Tonight, many Britons are asking how many more warnings before something breaks? Inside Parliament, tensions flared even as the pavement in Oxbridge was still stained with blood. The numbers tell a story of growing frustration. Arrivals are up more than 50% compared to the same period before the election. Illegal entries have surged by 52%. Hotel usage has risen by nearly half, and yet fewer than 2% of those who cross illegally are ever removed. The Home Office calls it progress. To many Britons, it feels like betrayal. While Westminster rehearses its lines, the streets are already writing their own. Labour defends the chaos as humanitarian management. Conservatives describe it as a system under strain. But to millions of taxpayers, it's something simpler. A government that's lost control of its borders and increasingly of its people. Parliament ended its session with noise. Sees not answers, and outside, Britain's patience finally snapped. Free hotels, free food, free cash. Those were the chants that rolled through Southampton as 60,000 people filled the streets. Flares in hand, banners raised. Portsmouth followed with 35,000 more. Brighton joined with nearly 20,000. By dawn, the entire south coast was alive. A wall of flags, fury and defiance. At the Highfield House Hotel alone, 250 riot officers faced the crowd. Their chants thundered through the streets. Protect our women, save our children. Bottles flew, pepper spray hung in the air. 14 officers were injured, 24 arrests made. But the crowd kept growing. Veterans, mothers, students, the unemployed, all united by anger. The flames weren't just on the streets, they were burning through the country's bloodstream. Compassion had turned into consequence, written now in blood. Government officials appealed for calm, but calm never came. The British lion, long silenced, was finding its roar again. By sunrise, Southampton wasn't just a city, it had become a statement. It's critical, one protester said. They must stop illegal migration into this country. Smoke still hung over Portswood Road. Police sealed off the Highfield district. 47 arrests. 19 injured, more than £2 million in property damage. What began as a protest had turned into a siege. The Home Office called it a contained disturbance. Locals called it something else. Revenge. That morning, the City Council met behind closed doors. Promises were made to investigate. No one mentioned the thousands still outside chanting, "Southampton speaks for Britain." The message was spreading faster than officials could suppress it. Across the nation, it was clear. The line was awake now, and its first roar came from Southampton. Inside Downing Street, the air was tense, the atmosphere of a war room. Ministers arrived through side entrances under heavy lights, faces pale, voices subdued. By 7 o'clock that morning, the Prime Minister had summoned an emergency Cobra meeting. Every briefing sheet carried the same question in bold. Who lost Southampton? Intelligence reports warned of coordinated protests forming in a dozen other towns. Police reserves were stretched thin, over 9,000 overtime hours logged in a single night. The Home Secretary demanded absolute control. The Defence Minister refused, describing it as a domestic war we cannot win. By midday, leaks began to surface. A classified memo titled "Operation Restore Silence" appeared online. It outlined curfew zones and media blackouts. The government moved to deny it, but the document spread faster than their statements could. Within hours, markets reacted, but a 2.8% drop. International headlines called Britain a democracy in recoil. Inside the cabinet room, tempers broke. One voice shouted, "You can't police 67 million people!" No one replied. The Prime Minister sat still, eyes fixed on a red folder labelled National Order Act. Draft. He didn't sign it. He simply murmured, "Contain it." But containment was no longer possible. The truth had already escaped and the country had stopped listening. By noon, divisions inside government were visible to everyone. 2 cabinet ministers refused to back the crackdown. One resigned live on television, calling it a betrayal of the British character. Another, a decorated veteran, warned that using troops against civilians would shatter the covenant between the military and the people. Still, the Home Secretary pressed forward. 2,000 soldiers were placed on standby under Operation Fortress. Armoured vehicles rolled toward the south coast. Officially, it was logistical support. Unofficially, the footage told a different story, that convoys of military vehicles beneath Union Jack flags moving toward a city still smouldering from the night before. More leaks followed. Internal reports revealed police morale down 37%, public confidence down 62%. Somewhere between those numbers, Britain felt the ground shift beneath it. A senior source in Whitehall summed it up in 3 words: fear of ourselves. Outside number 10, reporters shouted questions that went unanswered. The Prime Minister hadn't been seen for 31 hours. Behind the gates, aides worked in silence. They drafted a single line for the evening statement: the government remains in control. But no one believed it. By nightfall, the blackout began. Major broadcasters replaced live coverage with cooking shows and nature documentaries. Social media throttled videos tagged Southampton, yet the truth was multiplying. Mirror uploads, proxy sites, foreign servers. Within 24 hours, the footage had reached 47 million views. The images were raw. An elderly woman screaming through tear gas, a line of officers guarding an empty hotel, a child waving the Union flag upside down. Every frame undercut the government's claim of control. Inside the beat, internal memos labelled public reassurance package were leaked. ITV presenters refused to read from scripted segments. For the first time in years, Britain's media fractured. The next morning, the Herald ran a single searing headline: "What are we defending?" That question carried across the country. It echoed in classrooms, barracks, workplaces, even in churches, where priests began reading psalms about false kings and blind shepherds. In a nation that once prided itself on stability, the silence from leadership had become the loudest sound of all. And across Britain, people stopped waiting for permission to speak. They filmed, they shared, they remembered. The blackout had failed. The attempt to silence the nation had turned into the brightest night Britain had ever seen. 36 hours after the first riot, the Prime Minister finally appeared. The broadcast was stark. Filmed under harsh white light, no flag, no applause, no warmth. He spoke of rising arrivals, up more than 50% compared with pre-election levels. He called the violence in Hampton an isolated incident, but the words rang hollow. Across the country, people watched not on televisions but on their phones, live commenting, translating every phrase into disbelief and frustration. Outside, crowds gathered again. In Portsmouth, veterans sang the national anthem. In Nottingham, teachers stood holding candles. In Manchester, 10,000 people fell silent. For the injured, for the ignored. The anthem echoed line by line. Send her victorious, happy and glorious. Yet the tone was not pride, it was warning. Inside Downing Street, staff whispered that the address felt like a eulogy. Even loyal aides admitted the Prime Minister seemed out of touch. And when the broadcast ended, there was no applause, only the sound of clapping from outside. Slow, deliberate, defiant. It wasn't celebration, it was countdown. At dawn, they came, hundreds of veterans marching without banners or slogans, only the weight of their medals on their chests. Shoulder to shoulder, they filled the streets of Southampton in complete silence. Reporters called it the March of the Forgotten. One retired sergeant told Sky News, "We defended this country once, now we're defending it again, from within." Police were ordered to disperse them. Many refused. Some officers simply stepped aside, saluting as the veterans passed. That single gesture, the salute, and spread faster than any riot footage. By midday, more than 60 towns were holding vigils in solidarity. For the first time in decades, Britain looked at itself and saw division wearing a uniform. Inside Parliament, emergency debates descended into chaos. One MP shouted, "You've lost the public! You've lost the army! What's left?" No answer came. That evening, Veterans across social media shared a single line: "We serve the people, not the politicians." And then something unprecedented happened. Soldiers guarding Downing Street lowered their weapons. For a brief moment, the standoff that had defined a generation dissolved into silence. Not defiance, but something deeper: respect. The next morning, Britain woke to quiet. No speeches, no press, just streets swept clean by exhaustion. But beneath that calm, something irreversible had shifted. The government remained in power on paper, yet its authority had evaporated. Power had moved elsewhere. To the people who refused to forget, from Oxbridge to Southampton, from the Commons to the coast, the same truth resonated. Britain was never broken, only unheard. And now it was speaking again. The lion was no longer asleep. It was awake, watching, waiting, and remembering what it means to roar. This is Brit News. Stay